Nyago, you ready?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Nyago, you ready?
There's an echo though.
Yeah, hold on.
There's an echo though.
Yeah, hold on.
Oh wow. I think. Yeah. Okay. Now it's okay.
Okay. Hi, everybody. How is everyone doing? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I think we're just gonna give it another 1 to 2 minutes for everyone to come in. Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here today. We have a very special guest. I think Nyago, he is relatively in relatively new in Stockbit, but he has been giving us a lot of really, really good insights and posts and whatnot. And I thought of bringing him on board to kind of like discuss about the rubber glove industry and the COVID-19 and what's going on with that, and vaccine and what's going on with that, and hopefully we have a good discussion today. So I think before we start, maybe maybe everyone can just share this video to all your friends, and who everyone, I mean, who over here is bullish or bearish on glove? Maybe you guys can just type in the comments if you guys are bearish or bullish on glove. And if, let's say, you guys are bullish on glove, are you guys holding any glove counter? And which glove counter do you guys hold? Yeah. Okay. Hi, Viva. All right. Okay, so let's get the ball rolling. So I think just telling everybody about how the session is going to go. The floor is going to be with Nyago most of the time. I think he'll be presenting to us a slide, and from time to time, I think I will just butt in if there are any additional comments on my end. And of course, if there are any questions, please feel free to jot them down, and we can answer them as we go along. So before we start, I just want to give a short introduction about Stockbit. Basically, Stockbit, if you guys are not already inside, it's a social networking platform. It's a place where people, investors alike, especially in KLSC and Bursa Malaysia, can mingle, can learn, and can discuss about stocks. Right? It's a growing and it's a healthy community where a lot of the things that you want to see are at the control of your hands. So if, let's say, you guys are not yet in Stockbit, please download the app, or you can even just go to the web and join us, join the community. Everything is free in Stockbit. From time to time, some Stockbitters will share a lot of good and interesting trade ideas and whatnot. So and from time to time we have new features. So please do check us out. Nyago. So maybe before we start, please give us a little bit of background about yourself and whatnot.
Sure. So hi everyone. I guess some of you know me from my post on Stockbit. I have indeed joined relatively recently. So I think I joined back in October, if I'm not mistaken. But I only started being active around the beginning of December, I believe. So there have been a few dedicated followers over that time, and I'm very truly appreciated for that. My posts up to now have been focused mostly on gloves. That's not because I am particularly interested in the glove business or glove manufacturing or anything like that. It's just because I see the most value right now in that industry in particular. So probably I don't know if you want to start. So I have prepared kind of a short presentation. I don't know if you want to show it, or how do you want to go about it? Okay. So yeah, I can see that Thomas is says that he thought I was from Japan. So yeah, I worked in Japan for a while, a very long time ago, and people there were pretty amused by my name, because Nyago is a typical cat name in Japan. So you can imagine that there were a lot of jokes about me there. I mean, good type of jokes, right? They were not making fun of me or anything like that. So, but I'm actually from I'm from Bulgaria. It's a kind of a small country in Europe. It's part of the European Union, fortunately. Unfortunately, in terms of economy and in terms of performance, government performance or whatnot, it's usually ranked the worst in the European Union. So I will mention that a little bit later during the talk. I have been living in Malaysia for quite a while now. So I got married. My wife is Malaysian, so we married more than 8 years ago. So I've been living in Malaysia continuously for about 9 years now. I work for an IT company. I actually manage one of the departments in the company. So my day-to-day job is not really related to finance or investment or anything like this. However, I have a degree from the University of Economics in Varna, Bulgaria, a degree in economics and management in tourism. And then I got a master's degree in finance while I was here in Malaysia. It's a dual master's degree in Asia Pacific University with Staffordshire University, UK. And I've recently been accepted. So my proposal for a PhD research was accepted by University Malaya, and I was actually supposed to have already started working on it, but being a foreigner and being so there are some delays, and especially having in mind now the COVID situation, so I will probably be starting with it a little bit later this year. Yeah, so that's about me. If any of the viewers have any questions about me, you can definitely ask, and I'll try to explain more later, I guess, or on Stockbit.
Yeah, interesting background, Yago. You have perhaps my first Eastern European friend.
Okay, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, there are not really a lot of Eastern Europeans here in Malaysia in particular. I wouldn't say the Malaysia-Eastern Europe relationships are very strong. So, and this is actually part of the reason why it's so difficult for me to start with my PhD with because there's no embassy of Bulgaria in Malaysia, actually. So the nearest is in Jakarta, and I can't really go there right now. So it's kind of like it's a tight spot. So, but enough about me. It's not that interesting.
Okay. Yeah. So let's hear what you have to say about COVID-19 and vaccine and stuff. Let's
sure.
Get the
Sure. Yeah. So I mean the main goal of the talk is of course to talk about gloves, and that's what the focus is going to be on. But the problem is that gloves and almost any other industry out there, or maybe every industry in the world right now out there is very tightly connected to COVID, the situation with COVID and what's going on there. So without having a proper background in what exactly is happening with COVID, it's very difficult for us to invest in pretty much anything. So, I mean, of course, later on probably we'll mention about tech stocks. So you can say that tech stocks are kind of, beneficiaries of COVID as well. They also depend to a certain extent on COVID and the longevity of the pandemic. But of course, not as much as most other industries like transportation or construction, and of course, gloves is the main one that is important for. So first, the first graphic that I want to show is these are the daily cases, the graph of the daily cases of the pandemic since the very beginning. What is interesting about this graphic is given by the World Health Organization regions. So the World Health Organization regions are not continents per se. So they are, like, for example, the Americas are grouped together. They are approximately, the different regions feature approximately the same amount of population. So, of course, the Asian regions are a bit larger than the rest of the regions. But what is interesting here is for the majority of the people, especially in Malaysia, is something that I think people do not realize here, is how much better the situation in Malaysia or in most countries in Asia is as compared to the situation in the rest of the world. So this is, this is my theory, at least, is that this is one of the reasons why Malaysians are not as positive on gloves, for example, or as negative on recovery stocks as, for example, investors in some other regions, because Malaysians haven't yet seen the worst of the pandemic. And I mean, I truly hope that this will never happen, of course. I hope that Malaysians will not really have to go through the worst. But it can be much, much worse than what it is right now in Malaysia. And you can see from the figures for the Americas and Europe. So this is one factor. Another factor is that these figures don't really necessarily represent the correct picture. So there are vast differences between different countries in terms of how many tests they are conducting. And I recently shared a post on Stockbit about that. So I mentioned that Malaysia is one of the countries that is conducting relatively few tests. The reason for that is because Malaysia is using a strategy that is called clustering. So they try to discover all of the clusters and to test just the direct contacts of a person that has been confirmed to be COVID positive. Whereas many other countries in the world can't really afford that because they missed the stage where they were actually able to identify these clusters. So in the end of the day, nowadays, what they need to do is just very broad and not targeted at all testing in order to cover as much of the populations as possible. So, for example, this is what's happening, let's say, in the United States, which is, I believe, it's the world leader in terms of total number. They're not the leader in tests per capita, but they are the leader in terms of total number of tests. Most of the European countries are in the leading place in terms of tests per capita. So that's why the numbers are so huge in the Americas and in Europe. One of the reasons, of course. However, even these numbers don't show the correct picture. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of the examples is with South Africa. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about the variant of the virus that comes from South Africa, because this is very important. But for example, South Africa, just recently, they discovered that when they compared the mortality statistics for the entire period of 9 months of 2020, when the pandemic was happening, the excess mortality compared to what the predictions were is 45,000 additional deaths. So, of course, it's not necessary that this whole number of 45,000 additional deaths belongs to or is connected to COVID, but it is very likely that the majority of these 45,000 excess deaths are actually related to COVID. Whereas if you look at the official statistics, you will see that the deaths in South Africa, the officially reported ones that are connected to COVID are many times fewer than, like, it's about more than twice fewer than what the official mortality figures are. So the same thing actually is happening in Bulgaria, in my own country. So people weren't, so very few tests are being conducted in Bulgaria. The numbers are approximately the same as in Malaysia in terms of percentages. So people weren't really very sure about how the exact numbers look like before the National Statistics Institute actually released the figures for 2020, and it turned out that there is 15,000 excess deaths above the predicted numbers. And this is for a country of just about 7 million people, so a bit bigger than Singapore. So you can imagine that 15,000 excess deaths is a huge number, and this is again about twice larger than the officially reported number of COVID-related deaths, for example. So we have quite a significant discrepancy there, and the figures are certainly much larger than what we see in this graph. And it's very sure that the distribution of death cases is not, or the distribution of general cases is not the same as what we see on this graph, for example. So in the meantime, because of the large numbers, most of the European countries right now are in different stages of lockdowns. Germany just extended their lockdown until the middle of February. So France is under a kind of a curfew. So they have a evening curfew where after 6 p.m., if I'm not mistaken, people are not allowed to go out or to meet with each other or anything like this. The Netherlands are also considering similar curfew, although they are already under a lockdown. But all of these things are happening for the very first time since World War II. So this is an extreme situation. This is a war situation, basically in Europe and in North America, for example. So I would say that a few countries outside of Asia are dealing properly with the pandemic, and they are all very, very worried about what's going on. So this kind of relates to the next topic that I'm going to talk about. So another thing that is not very well understood is that the virus's lethality, so how deadly it is not necessarily the main thing that is concerning, or not necessarily. This is for sure not the main thing that is concerning about officials around the world. So the main thing that they are concerned about is the infectiousness of the virus. So the more infectious it is, the more people will get sick in a shorter period of time, and the more overwhelmed the healthcare systems of the world are going to become as a result of that. So it's a huge concern. And this relates to the next thing that I want to talk about. It's the variants and mutations of the virus. So again, this is a topic that is not very well understood or concerned about in Malaysia, because Malaysia's borders have practically been closed, and I think many Malaysians don't realize that. So the borders of Malaysia have been closed. Malaysia is pretty much not allowing anybody, except for some extreme reasons, like you have to have some very, very valid reasons to want to, if you are a foreigner, for example, to want to come in Malaysia, and the chance that you get rejected is much higher than the chance that you actually get approved. If you are a Malaysian, you can come back to Malaysia. There is no way for the Malaysian government to stop you, but of course, because of that, there is the compulsory quarantine, which is happening in a hotel, for which you pay on your own, and so on. So basically, again, this guarantees that you are not going to come back to Malaysia or go out just for the sake of it, or just having fun or anything like that. And first of all, it's very difficult for Malaysians, if they are in Malaysia right now, to go out of Malaysia. Like, they have to have some very concrete reasons for that. So this is pretty much closed borders, and the situation has been like this in Malaysia since pretty much the beginning of the pandemic. The situation is not the same for most other countries in the world, right? So movement across countries in the world has been a lot more lax than it is in Malaysia, for example. And this has resulted in a number of problems. And these problems are also related to the mutations that are constantly popping up relating to the virus's genome. So the first such mutation was actually discovered in November. Actually, it was discovered in October, but what happened is it was first sequenced in Denmark, and it turned out that this is a mutation that originates from the mink population. I don't know if the viewers know what is mink. These are kind of small creatures that are reared mostly for their very beautiful skin. So Denmark actually had to kill about 18 million minks. So basically the entire farming industry of minks in Denmark was destroyed overnight because they discovered this new mutation of the virus. So I guess this can actually tell you how dangerous that mutation is, and how likely it is that this mutation will result in huge economic damage that goes beyond just destroying one whole industry in the country, for example. So that was dubbed cluster 5, by the way, if people haven't heard about it. So the next variant that was actually announced in December was the so-called UK variant. So that variant was in the a lot of people were paying attention to it, but the thing is that this variant, while it proliferated in the UK, and while it is more infectious, so it's about 50 to 75% more infectious than the current variant that is, for example, found in Malaysia, let's say, which is already a pretty infectious variant, by the way, the one that is in Malaysia or in most countries in the world. Although it is more infectious, it doesn't affect the capability of the body to if the body already has existing antibodies developed as a result of previous infection with COVID. So these antibodies serve as a protection against this variant as well. So that's why it's not really that dangerous or that much of a concern for the international community. However, the other variants that started popping up at the end of December and the beginning of this month, and actually for example, the Illinois variant from the United States was just announced about, I believe, a couple of days ago or something like this. So they are still investigating it. So these variants, besides being more infectious, scientists are very worried that because of some specific mutations, like for example, the one that I have included here, E484K, because of this mutation is one of the ones that are interesting about the macrobiological community. So these are escape mutations. What an escape mutation means is that if you have pre-existing antibodies against COVID, this new variant is so different that the existing antibodies do not recognize this new variant of the virus. So if you have already had COVID, if you encounter this new virus, you're going to get infected again. So, and the most worrisome thing in these cases is that it is possible that the virus has mutated sufficiently to also be able to escape the antibodies produced, basically you can say the antibodies that are produced by the vaccines, although the vaccines doesn't just affect the antibodies, but let's keep it simple here. So, so this is a very major concern. They are right now running tests on that, but more and more scientists are coming out saying that it is very possible that we'll need to redesign the vaccines right now. So especially this happened today when they were talking about the South African variant. So I believe yesterday they released the South African Health Institute. So they released a brand new study about the South African variant, and they confirmed 100% that the existing antibodies do not deal with this virus, and they suspect that the current design of the vaccines, we're going to talk in a while about the vaccines, they are not able to actually deal with this variant of the virus. So this is very dangerous. And I mean, usually in such cases, a question occurs, like how do they know, for example, that some variant is more infectious? So it's more transmissible, for example. So it's a pretty simple way. So the virus has, basically any virus that wants to infect humans, it has one goal in mind, and that's to proliferate and to multiply as much as possible, as quickly as possible. If possible, this also involves not killing the host, at least not killing the host quickly, right? So, so it is believed that COVID has already reached that stage where it's not so lethal, but it still hasn't reached that stage where it's infectious enough for its own purposes. For example, of course, the purposes of the COVID virus are exactly the opposite of what we want them to be. So it wants to transmit faster and more. And we just hope that that will not happen, but unfortunately, that's how nature works, basically. So if you have a variant that is discovered in a larger number of sequenced probes, blood probes, basically that's a clear sign that that variant that is becoming the dominant variant in a certain area is actually more infectious, because the more infectious variant will actually take over older versions of the virus that are less infectious, basically. So that's how scientists know that these variants are more infectious than the previous ones. So this, of course, relates to what's going on with the vaccines, and vaccines have been the huge topic of the last few months. And since all the companies started, the first one was the Russian Gamaleya, so they released stellar report in August, if I'm not mistaken. So later on, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, they also released pretty nice reports, I would say. So the thing is, there are very huge differences between the different vaccines from the point of view of their impact. So right now, the vaccines that are vaccine that is most talked about is, of course, the Pfizer vaccine. The thing that most people are focusing on when they talk about vaccines is that they look at, are they dangerous? Like, is it safe if I want to take this new, especially the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA technology-based vaccines? Is it really safe if I want to take them? This is brand new technology that it has never been tested on a large scale or anything like that. So this is not the right question, and I think many people don't realize that. So in terms of safety, the procedures and tests that these vaccines go through are designed to show that the safety is pretty much the same or even better in some cases than any other vaccine that any of us have ever vaccinated ourselves with throughout our life, including since we were born, basically, like when we're just babies. So in terms of safety, there is nothing to suggest that the current vaccines or any future vaccines are less safe than what we have already been vaccinated with throughout our lives. So that's not the right question. The right question is how effective the vaccines are in actually, first of all, stopping the people from getting too sick from the virus, and second, potentially stopping people from transmitting the virus to others. So to this question about transmissibility after vaccination, unfortunately, the tests on the vaccines were not designed with that in mind, so we do not know. Nobody knows if after you get vaccinated, even if you develop all the immunities necessary to fight the virus, if you actually get the virus, because you can still get the virus even if you are immune against it, if you can actually still transmit it. The most likely answer is that yes, if you are vaccinated, if you have the immunity, you can still transmit the virus. So that's the most likely scenario in this sense.
So you're saying that even though you are already vaccinated, you can still be a carrier?
Yes, you can be a carrier, and not just a carrier, you can transmit it to others. Yeah. Right? So this is a very major point here that I think many people don't realize. But this is not the issue that concerns me and many other scientists, by the way, around the world. So the issue of concern is the actual efficacy of the vaccine. So it's very interesting. Israel is the country that is ahead of everybody in terms of inoculations up to now. They have vaccinated almost 30% of their population by now. So they are far away from everybody else. Of course, one of the main reasons is because Israel has one of the strongest lobbies in the world. And of course, many other, I mean, it's a densely populated country, it's a small country with small population. So, a lot of factors there that are in their favor in particular. And of course, it's a rich country. But the thing the most interesting thing that comes from Israel that actually was just published earlier today, is that the one of the chief medical staff. So he's a military general. He said that unfortunately the efficacy of the vaccines or the immunity developed from the vaccines after one dose is far below what they expected it to be. So why is this important? So I have written a more detailed post on the number of vaccines that are going to be rolled out in the world in 2021. Basically, the main takeout from that is that there are not going to be produced enough vaccines in the entire world out of all of the companies that are producing vaccines. This is assuming that every single vaccine goes according to plan. And for example, the GlaxoSmithKline Sanofi vaccine failed. So that's a vaccine that has 700+ million pre-orders for. So this is assuming that we have everything go according to plan. We still will not have enough vaccines for enough population of the world by 2021 produced, not distributed and people getting vaccinated. This is production rates, right? So we don't have enough. The vaccine, from this point of view, that is actually going to result in, like, to have actually the biggest impact is the AstraZeneca Oxford University vaccine, because they are going to produce about 3 billion doses of that vaccine. And of course, most of the doses are going to go to India. This is a separate topic. I don't want to go too much in depth on how vaccines are going to be distributed and why they are going to be distributed this way. But anyway, so this is the vaccine that is going to have the largest impact. But back to Israel. So what happened is that because there are not going to be enough vaccines, and because even the available vaccines are only going to start trickling down to every country around the world in the second part of the year. So this means that by June, July, September, we are going to be in a, like the entire world basically is going to be in a situation very similar to how it has been over the last 2 or 3 months, let's say, or something like this. And I think this is one thing that many people don't realize yet, but this is how it's going to be. And so what the countries that have the largest amount of vaccines available right now, which is the United States and the United Kingdom, what they are doing, or at least what they are planning to be doing. So from what I understand, the UK have already started doing it, but the US haven't started yet. So what they're planning to do is that they're going to vaccinate as many people as possible with 1 dose. So they're going to vaccinate with 1 dose. And then, for example, for the Pfizer vaccine, they are supposed to vaccinate you with the 2nd dose 3 weeks later. But they are not going to be doing that. So they are going to prolong that that period to like 3 months later, for example, or they're even talking about doing it further away in the future. So what their hope is that this 1 dose is going to provide sufficient immunity to actually have proper impact on the COVID pandemic in the particular country. Unfortunately, what Israel says, so the UK are hoping that just 1 dose of the vaccine, of the Pfizer vaccine, actually can result in about 90% immunity against the virus already. So they're calling the 2nd dose booster dose, which can boost until 95%, let's say, the immunity. Unfortunately, the US are saying that according to their data and according to data shared from Pfizer, 1 dose most likely results in about 50% efficacy. So just half. And the problem is that right now Israel are saying that this is even lower, so it's just 33%. So this means that 1 dose is not enough, and this means that whatever kind of roundabouts countries are going to try to pull up and trying to get as many people inoculated as possible in the shortest period of time, unfortunately, it's not going to work. So this is scary. And so recently, a similar thing happened with the Sinovac vaccine. So basically, the China company, they released a report where they were saying that they have very high efficacy rates and everything is fine. So they released data for Turkey. In Turkey, the efficacy was something like in the Turkey trial, the efficacy was something like 91%. In the Indonesia trial of the exact same vaccine, the efficacy was 65%, and in Brazil, the efficacy was just 50%. So there are two possible reasons of why that might be happening. One of the reasons is because there's more, so there are more cases, more frequently people get infected in Indonesia and Brazil as compared to Turkey. And second, which is much more worrisome, is because the virus has most likely mutated more in Brazil and Indonesia, which means that the vaccines that are designed for older variants of the virus are not as efficient as they should be. So this is quite concerning. And while vaccines that are based on the mRNA technology, like Pfizer and Moderna, they can be redesigned relatively quickly. They say that they can redesign the vaccines within 6 weeks, but this basically means that they'll have to start production from the beginning, basically, if that's the case, and they're not really as efficient, as effective against the newer versions of the virus.
Bro, Nyago, I was supposed to go to like Indonesia like next month, but after listening to you, I'm not too sure now.
Yeah, I wouldn't go. So
Okay.
this is very interesting, by the way. So obviously there is no Indonesia variant of the virus, right? We have never heard about it. I don't think it will ever happen. Why the first variant that we heard about is from the UK, and the second dangerous variant that turned out that is going around the world that we heard about is the Brazil variant that was actually sequenced in Japan. So why that happened is not because the virus suddenly decides that it's going to mutate more in the UK or somewhere else or something like this. So the virus most likely mutates with approximately similar rate everywhere in the world. Based on, we have to hold for natural transmissibility, basically. But if we hold for that, most likely the virus behaves the same way everywhere. But why it was discovered in the UK is because the UK do a lot more sequencing on the virus genome. So this means that they take samples from people and they sequence a large percentage of these samples, much larger than almost any other country in the world. And the same thing, Japan are doing a very similar thing, for example. So that's why the Brazil virus was actually discovered in Japan, which is, it's funny. So anyway, regarding the actual timeline of how things are going to go from between January and March, so this is based on a post I wrote on Stockbit, I believe, at the end of last year. So this is still 100%, the same. Nothing pretty much has changed. So from January to March, we're going to be in a situation exactly like the situation right now. So we're going to be in heavy lockdowns everywhere in the world. The vaccination campaign is just getting started. So, like for example, the United States has inoculated, and this also relates to problems with logistics. So the United States actually employed the US Army, the biggest and arguably one of the best ordered and structured institutions in the entire world. So they are working with the US Army on the logistics of the vaccine, and they did manage to get 30 million doses distributed across the United States pretty quickly. But the problem is, so the goal of the Trump administration was actually to get 20 million people inoculated with one dose, of course, by the end of 2020. So by now, we are already in the third week of 2021, they have put only 16 million vaccines, basically. So we are pretty much 1 month behind on what the schedule is supposed to be in the United States. So yeah, January and March are going to be exactly the same. April and September, there is going to be slight drop in terms of cases, mostly because it's going to be summer in the northern hemisphere and in the countries that are hardest hit, like the European countries and North America. So there are likely to be fewer cases there, not because of the vaccination campaign so much as because of the seasonality. And then from October to December this year, the European Union countries, United States, the UK, and a few other countries like small countries like Singapore and Israel, rich small countries, United Arab Emirates. So they're most likely going to have vaccinated enough percent of their population to be safe against the currently existing variant of the virus. So we do not know if this is going to be enough against the new variants that are coming up. So, and the end of the year is going to be when most of the third world countries are actually going to start officially with their vaccination campaign. So of course, probably they are going to have some extremely small amounts of doses distributed before that, but this is when the actual impactful phase is going to start for these countries. So yeah, we are in for a very, very long ride that is going to go well into 2022, and then having in mind the mutations of the virus, having in mind how fast it mutates. Actually, it kind of mutates now faster towards a state that is more difficult to control than it was expected to be. So we are most likely going to be in for a period where once we finish with the current vaccination campaign, we're actually going to have to start with a new vaccination campaign anyway. So it's a it's a very long haul ride, and it's not something that is going to end anytime this year, anywhere in the world, I would say. So in this regard, it's very interesting to talk about bubbles. I just want to mention this very quickly before moving to the graphs finally. So unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately because specifically in Malaysia, but of course this is not just a trademark of Malaysia or something that is happening in isolation in Malaysia. People are a little bit too optimistic, unfortunately. I don't know if the reason for that is because they don't understand what exactly is happening. I mean, most people in the world don't really understand what's happening, so that's not a problem. I believe that's one of the main reasons. But of course, there are very objective reasons for what I want to call the current bubble in the market, which is obviously related to the extremely low, historically low interest rates and the money creation from the central banks in the different countries. So we had a quick conversation on Stockbit with a few other Stockbitters. I remember one of them was FA Academy. He wrote a very detailed post on that. So what I want to explain here is that low interest rates and money supply, higher money supply, they are not factors of figuring out if there is a bubble or not. They are catalysts to the bubble, right? So the actual measurement of the bubble can only be done if you compare the actual profitability of the companies as compared to the market valuations of the company. So this is how you measure a bubble, basically. And of course, there are objective reasons for this bubble to be observed, but it's a bubble nonetheless, unfortunately. So, I mean, this is of course my opinion, and I have seen quite a number of other people share it, of course.
Yeah, I think on that, I just would like to add that there is no doubt that there are some certain companies that is thriving, and some certain sectors, of course, like the tech sector and all that. And I personally believe that it has got to do with a little bit of scarcity premium as well, in a sense that people don't really know where to invest their money. And the only thing that they can kind of like invest and believe in is in tech, because they're kind of like see how fast the digitalization and global digitalization have become. And therefore, I guess there is a term that has been flying around these days, which is called the techflation. So I think that's definitely what's happening. Of course, I do not doubt that a lot of things are expensive and overvalued. As a matter of fact, my biggest investment, which is Tesla, they're basically trading at a price in which I would have thought was gonna only happen in 2024, right? So yeah, it's definitely overvalued against timelines, especially with all these tech and tech manufacturing sectors. But yeah, I mean, let's move on to rubber glove, Nyago.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, regarding the glove industry itself, the interesting thing that I want to look at right now today is the demand supply equilibrium, if we could call it equilibrium. Actually, it's not an equilibrium. It's not going to be in an equilibrium for a long period of time. So the supply demand dynamic, I guess. So this data that I'm showing here on the left side, this actually data, the table is actually from The Edge, the Malaysian newspaper. It's outdated data because, for example, Top Glove just today announced that already their capacity is for 91 billion gloves per annum. And it's going to become 110 billion by the end of this year. So you can say that as we, these companies that are listed here, they add more capacity. And Supermax, for example, they're going to almost double their capacity to almost 50 billion per annum. For example, in the table, 20 billion. So yeah. Hey, Ronnie,
Yep.
No, okay. So anyway,
you continue first. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. There's some problem with the sound, I guess.
Yeah.
So what were you saying? I'm sorry, I missed that.
No. Go ahead first, Nyago.
Okay. So basically, we all know who the Big Four are. The Big Four control about 55% of the global production right now, and it is expected that they're going to continue controlling that, especially when we talk about the highest profit margin segments of the industry, which are the nitrile gloves and to a lesser extent the latex rubber gloves. So, like for example, the table that I have given here on the right side below, you can see that for a company like Blue Sail, and in fact, most of the Chinese glove production facilities, so they produce vinyl gloves as opposed to the gloves that are on demand right now and that are going to continue to be on demand for the foreseeable future. So they are not necessarily a major threat, I would say. However, they are of course going to be adding a lot more capacity, specifically for nitrile gloves, for example. So Inco Medical that announced that it's going to add 45 billion capacity for 45 billion more pieces per annum by 2026. Later on, we'll see how their valuations are actually exploding as compared to the to the valuations of the companies listed on Bursa, for example. Another thing that is very important, and we talked about earlier today, is that the secondary players in Malaysia. So there, even when you consider the additional capacity that is coming on board, and I know that you have a very detailed graph on that, and I hope you share it with us. Even if we take this into account, this additional capacity only results in about probably 20 to 25% of the global supply, for example. So everything is still moving forward. Everything is still going to be controlled by the Big Four, led 100% by Top Glove. So Top Glove are expanding actually much faster than pretty much anybody else, followed by Supermax, basically. So yeah, I'm not sure if you want to share that table that you have. It's very, very interesting. I'm sure everybody will be interested.
Okay, just 1 second.
So Lawrence is asking in the chat how much quantity Toto estimated. So the current quantity of gloves that are being produced around the world is about 370 billion. So you can add to that about 20% for this year, let's say. So it's going to be about 430 to 440 billion, for example, for this year, by the end of this year, basically. If you add all the expansions in the world, so all the companies, all the newcomers, all the current players that are actually expanding their capacity.
Okay. So over here, what I have is basically just the valuation analysis, but I will come back to the valuation analysis later on. But what we should focus on is basically over here, which is the current capacity, right, on first tier and second tier Malaysian rubber glove players plus Switzerland gloves, because the two largest glove makers are definitely Top Glove and Hatta. The third is Sri Trang, and after that you have your Kosan, and you have your Supermax, and you have your Riverstone. So what is not here in this particular graph is, for instance, like your Mercator, like your Inco and your Ansel and whatnot. And of course, all the unlisted players in Malaysia as well. So like your WRP, like your Latex partners and whatnot. So what I'm showing you here is that everybody here, they represent 75% of global supply as of end of 2020. Okay, and yeah, so this is about 75%. And what I also have here is that, so now these are the what I would say as the newcomers or the glove wannabes, those people that have actually announced that they are going to produce and move into rubber glove. So you'll have your Aspen and your Iconic and your, for instance, Masing, who is a property developer that had ventured into gloves. Okay, and then of course you have your AT and you have all the other Carex, even Notion and Salcon. So a lot of them comes in different forms, right? So for instance, some of them like Inix and Salcon and DGSB, what they had done is that they acquired some non-listed glove companies. And some of these glove companies, yes, they might even have CE and FDA certificates like Salcon, which is acquiring 51% in JR Engineering. But most of them, they do not. Some even are actually acquiring those companies that is not doing medical gloves. So for instance, like DGSB, when they acquired Duramid, Duramid is not a medical glove player. They are basically an industrial glove maker. And therefore, they would definitely need to do, a shift in production and whatnot. Now, another thing to notice is that the different newcomers, they have a different timeline in getting the factory ready. So of course, one of the kind of like social media friendly company, which is AT Systemization, right? Now those guys, you probably have seen all the viral videos going around and of them showing that they have their glove manufacturing facility all up and running within a short time period of like 5 months or something like that. Now that could actually happen. It's because they do not need to build up a factory from ground up. So they do not need to acquire land. They do not need to build a factory, which actually will take a lot of time. And therefore, what they just did is to revamp an existing factory to make it into a rubber glove factory. Whether that is actually going to be as effective and as efficient in the long term, nobody knows. But during my interview, or rather Stockbit's interview with Iconic, the main reason why Iconic and Masing and even Aspen, in that sense, why they actually prefer to build from scratch is that they would like to make their factory as effective and as efficient as possible. Okay, so now the most important part of all this is that the plant capacity, right? Now, if you see all the newcomers, like one of the main arguments against investing in glove is people are talking about overcapacity, oversupply in 2023 and all that. But all the newcomers, all they are adding in 2022, okay, of course, these are all progressive, but at the end of 2022, most of them will be at full capacity. And that in its sense is an additional 35 billion of gloves. Of course, this is just the newcomers. You need to add up all the first tier and second tier players as well as all those non-listed names and also all the foreign names as well. But compare that to, let me show you this one. So this is the data that is coming from Markma, right? So the data that is coming from Markma right now, we are at 360 billion glove demand per annum. And 2021, people are talking about, Markma is forecasting about 450 billion, and 2022, it's 518 billion. Okay, and now, so this is the thing between demand and supply, right? So currently in 2020, we know that there is a huge shortage of glove And that has caused an inelastic demand, and therefore, like average selling price has gone skyrocketed, right? But the current first and second tier glove players in Malaysia, okay, including Riverstone and UG Healthcare, and including Sri Trang Glove, those people that I've showed you earlier, which control 75% of the global population, what's going to happen is that this year alone, they will have an additional 30 billion pieces capacity in 2021. But you see here, like Markma, it is actually showing a 90 billion jump in demand. So 90 billion jump in demand is going to be filled with 30 billion jump in supply from the first and second tier players, because the third tier players are just coming on board. Okay, and in 2020 and beyond, so what I'm saying is there's still going to be a massive shortage in 2021. Okay, and from 2022, right? All the new entrants that we saw just now, Iconic, Mustang, Aspen, Notion, and so on, they're just going to add an additional 35 billion, while Markma is predicting an additional 70 billion. So what it means is that the first tier players will still need to continue to expand in 2022, so that it will fill this particular gap in terms of demand and supply. Therefore, what I'm trying to show is that until 2022, demand is going to definitely outstrip supply by a lot. And even then, even beyond that, in 2023 up to 2025, perhaps it is going to continue as well. Yeah, and I think this particular slide is very interesting, because it also tells you on why is the demand going to be very strong, right? So demand is going to be strong, driven by strong market fundamentals across geographics. So I would like to actually highlight on this point number 2, because actually myself and Yago, we actually have spoken about this before the session, and I think there is such I would say there's a wrong kind of like perception in the market with regards to vaccination and administration of vaccines against like hygiene, increment of hygiene awareness, right? So what I would like to say is that, one second, the number one reason on why the glove demand is going to go up in 2021 and beyond is because there has been a structural change in how people perceive as hygienic, right? So it has nothing to do with, I see a lot of people, those even bullish about gloves, they talk about how vaccine and administration will boost the glove demand. But honestly speaking, administering vaccination with or without glove does not matter, because it is actually insignificant. For instance, if let's say you are just assuming that everyone in the global population which is 7 billion, is going to get vaccinated twice, for instance, right, for Pfizer vaccine, that in itself is going to be what, 7 multiplied by 4, which is 28 billion of glove demand, additional demand, and that is less than 10%, right? So the number one reason of which those that is going to be bullish about glove is that they need to understand about the increment in hygiene awareness. The demand for glove is going to be continue to be strong because of this. Okay, so why I find it sometimes odd, right, in a sense that a lot of people are focusing about the wrong things. In that, why do they focus on vaccination administration when they, right in front of their eyes, whenever you do a PCR testing, even in Malaysia, everybody is wearing gloves. If you see all the BP healthcare people, they are wearing gloves. And I personally own a hygiene company, okay, and we have been going around and doing disinfection everywhere. And every single house and every single rotation and every single job that we do, we need a pair of gloves as well. And not only that, just now when I was on the way up into my house in my condominium, the security guard is wearing gloves. These guys are wearing gloves because they just need to open or touch a high touch point areas. And this is just in Malaysia. Can you imagine if this happens globally? So the number one reason on why you need to be bullish about glove, if you are bullish about glove, is because there is a really structural change in awareness of hygiene.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think I'm not sure. I mean, Nyago, maybe you have something else to add.
Yeah, so actually many people are particularly worried about, so we talked in the beginning about the longevity of the COVID pandemic, right? I think there is a lot of misunderstanding there. So a lot of people think, okay, like I think that's what happened in September, right? When the news about vaccines started pouring in, everybody was like, oh, well, the vaccines are here, we are saved. And they didn't even think about all the additional problems that are going to be there with vaccines, which is a lot of things. So we already talked that by the end of 2021, the COVID crisis is not going to be over. So it's going to be well into 2022 at least. So many people are also worried about what's going to happen beyond the crisis, right? Because eventually, somehow, the world needs to move on, and they need to get, at least start ignoring COVID at some point, I guess. So what's going to happen after that? One of the main things that is what you mentioned. So it's a hygiene awareness. So in your slide, you also had this small part that was about usage in different countries in the world. So right now, yeah, you can show the slide with the demand there. Slide 3. Yeah, so the bottom part of this slide. So it's basically showing that while the population in the advanced, the developed countries actually represents a relatively small percentage of the world population, it's actually responsible for a huge percentage of the glove demand up to now, and it has always been like this. So right now and beyond the COVID crisis, the largest increase in amount is actually going to be coming from developing countries. Like, for example, what you're showing on the map is that basically if you compare the figures, this is the per capita usage of gloves in different countries. So if you compare the usage in North America, in the US and Canada, to China, for example, or India, it's many times smaller. So for example, in China, on average, there's something like 5 gloves per capita per year or something like this. If you compare this to the US, which is 150, there's obviously huge gap there for growth that comes from developing countries that are with huge population. I mean, it includes Indonesia, of course. So I think Indonesia is like what, the 5th most populous country in the world or something like this, right?
Yeah. It's the 5th. 300 million.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I mean, these are going to be part of the drivers. Another thing that is specifically going to be coming from the developed countries is going to be about the replenishment of the stockpile. So the developed countries in the world, like for example the United States and a few others that have not done it yet. So after World War II, the United States commissioned a special unit that was responsible for having supplies for war times. So many European countries also have that. I mean, Europe and North America have gone through horrible wars in the 20th century, so they don't want to be in a situation where they don't have, enough supplies of some vital things ready for when they need them, for example, in emergency situations. So the stockpile, the strategic stockpiles of every single country right now are depleted. So in November, there was a commission in the United States that actually issued a report where they say that they need, their goal is to have 4.5 billion pieces of gloves available in their strategic stockpile on a 90-day inventory basis. So every 90 days, they want to have 4.5 billion gloves available. So in October, they had 2 million. So this is 4.5 billion, and they had just 2 million. So by December, I think they managed to procure something like additional 100 million or something like this. So they are still very, very far from anything even resembling enough availability of this stockpile. So other countries, the UK started actually developing such a stockpile at the end of 2019, so it was before the COVID crisis. It's also depleted. The European Union just this year started developing such common stockpile for the entire European Union. Japan is going to be doing that. So I assume that countries like China, for example, and India that are in general in war terms with other neighboring countries, for example, they are also going to want to do something like that. So this is where additional demand is going to be coming from in huge amounts, moving forward. So, for example, the companies that are in the best position to take advantage of this specific additional demand are the big four, basically, because they are the only ones who are able to procure enough additional supply for a government like the US to be able to get it on a 90-day basis. For example, if somebody comes to you and tells you, oh, I want 4.5 billion gloves every 3 months, I mean, you cannot go to anybody, right? You have to go to Toplab or Harta, for example. Like, I don't think any other company in the world can actually supply with that. So, these are basically baked in profits that are going and revenues that are going to be coming to the big companies. So another thing, just last thing that I want to mention specifically regarding the supply-demand dynamics is many people are particularly worried about the danger of China or to some extent Thailand, but I think most people are specifically worried about China, countering the dominance of Malaysia in this market. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that China in particular is mostly specialized in producing vinyl gloves as opposed to nitrile and latex gloves. So in fact, the main potential competitor of Malaysia may be Thailand, because one major strategic disadvantage that China has is that the natural gas, the fuel that is used in the glove factories, is a lot more expensive in China than it is in Malaysia, for example. So it's 45%. I believe this is based on a report by Maybank, if I'm not mistaken. So in Malaysia, natural gas costs 45% less than it does in China. So this is a huge disadvantage for China, for example, in this industry. Another problem that basically all other countries in the world, except for Malaysia, have is that you don't have this whole supply chain. So, for example, the US announced that they are going to start developing some capacity to actually produce gloves in the United States itself. But the problem is that besides building a factory there, they need to actually build up from scratch the entire supply chain, which, for example, includes companies that produce the dipping formers for gloves that have to be changed on a regular basis, for example. So you need to have that already, let alone about the raw material that is basically just available in Asia, basically. So these are major strategic advantages that Malaysia and to a certain extent Thailand have over pretty much anybody else. And this is one of the reasons why, for example, street rank among, and you have extremely powerful countries like the United States, Japan, and Germany that have been looking into producing medical gloves, for example, especially over the last few months. And Japan and Germany have pretty much completely scratched off the plan. So they are not going to have in the foreseeable future factories on their territories because it's just not a feasible process. So even if they want to have any kind of factories, they're going to. So this is a quote from a Japanese official. So it's going to take at least 2 to 3 years to build a factory and to build the whole supply chain in order to get it operational, which is just not feasible, and it will be in very small quantities compared to what is available right now coming from Malaysia, for example. So Malaysia is just it just has too many advantages over pretty much anybody else. And of course, regarding street trend, they're one of the biggest producers of natural rubber in the world. So they are actually focused on latex gloves. They are not so much into natural. I don't even know, but I think some very minor percentage of their production is actually in natural gloves. So in this segment, even street trunk are not a major competitor to the big Malaysian companies, for example. Okay, so and the last things that I want to talk about, although I think up to now
we talk about RSS first, Nyago, before we go to companies in focus.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I think before we go into company specific, me and Yago, we had a we had a very interesting discussion about what is happening with rubber gloves and why is it so weak, especially from the beginning of this year. And that actually have got a lot to do with RSS. Now, I'm not sure how everybody is understanding the new dynamics of regulated short selling. But what has happened, or rather, what has changed from the end of last year to this year, is that there is actually this thing called a regulated short selling, in a sense that some short participants are able to borrow shares from an SBL desk. And what they can do then with those borrowed shares is that they can sell it in the market, right? So the first thing to understand is that in order for you to do that, in order for you to borrow some shares, you will definitely need to pay some sort of funding costs. Let's just assume it's like 8% per annum or something like that. So this is just an example. So perhaps what has happened is perhaps EPF have got a lot of glove shares, and they would like to be a long-term investor. They are not really worried about things, and they decided, you know what, instead of me just sitting down on these shares doing nothing and getting nothing in return, perhaps what I can do is I will just lend my shares to an SBL desk, for instance, Afin Huang SBL desk or something, and says that, okay, whoever that wants to borrow my shares, you can have it, but at a certain percentage of funding costs in which that the two parties have to agree with one another. And for instance, let's just say, for example purposes, JP Morgan decided, hey, I would like to do that. So JP Morgan borrows the shares, and they discuss with EPF, and they agreed on a certain price. By the way, this is all just an example, yeah. So, and then they decided, okay, I'm going to short the shares. So that is basically what is happening with regulated short selling. Now, there are a few things to note as an investor, in a sense, on how this game is played, because Bursa actually have got a few regulations as well. So one of the regulations is that you can only short up to 4% of the total number of shares outstanding. Okay, so that's one which is actually very interesting and something that you really need to look out for. And other than that, you also need to be kind of like you need to be aware that the regulated short selling and this 4% limit is not exclusive. Means anybody that can short, or a short participant can actually use this limit. So I'm just gonna make this bigger. Okay, and 1 second. Yeah, so perhaps myself and Yago, we can talk about this. So what I have done here is that I have keyed in every single RSS value and volume every single day ever since the first day of the new year. Okay, and what you can see is that there is definitely an attack in glove. There is definitely a short movement, an RSS movement against the rubber glove players in Malaysia. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Yago did an analysis. 90% of the RSS volume in Malaysia for the first 2 weeks are all in rubber gloves. Okay, so what is the interesting thing over here? Firstly, you can see that Top Glove, it's insane. People are shorting Top Glove, 218 million shares, and it's valued at 1.2 billion that is being short. Okay, Harta is 500 million, and Kosan is 250 million. Now, why do people not short Supermax? I'm not too sure. Perhaps Supermax either maybe they are in the KLCI and people don't really fancy it, or the shop participants somehow is just not looking into Supermax. I'm not sure what the reason is, but Supermax is not being shorted as much as the others, or even perhaps or even perhaps there is no available lender of Supermax shares, right? So these are all the factors. So yeah, in total, for the 2.5 weeks that we have into the new year, there's a short value of 2 billion ringgit being shorted in the rubber glove players. Now, the RSS data that is given by Bursa, it was nice. As a matter of fact, what we can do is we did a simple average price on what is the entry fee for all these short participants. So what you can see is that this is the average selling price. So for them now, as an RSS, once you short something, you need to buy back in order for you to realize your gain. Okay, so number one, what I can tell you that is that in my personal opinion, the price of which these short participants have shorted the rubber gloves is not really favorable in terms of risk and reward wise, in my opinion. Okay, and perhaps we can discuss with Nyago on that later on. Now, the second thing to take note is that remember the 4% cap. Now, Top Glove is already at 2.68% cap, in a sense that there is only about an additional 30% bullet. You know, for instance, if let's say you're talking about capital and bullets, there is only left 30% of your bullet for you to short Top Glove until it is already finished, until the cap is already done and dusted. You cannot short Top Glove anymore. But of course, for Harta and Supermax, there is still plenty to do that. So that is something else to take note. For Kosan, it is still like 50-50. Okay, on the third point that you need to realize also is that when is because when you short something, you need to, as I mentioned earlier, you need to buy back the shares for you to realize your gain or kind of like cut loss, right? So that is basically an activity which is called short covering. Short covering actually. Sorry. So, in a sense, all these kind of like RSS volume, it has to be reversed. They need to be bought back. And from the variance here, or rather like from, if let's say you're observing this data on a daily basis, there are two things that you can see. Number one, Kosan short covering had started. And number two, as a matter of fact, Top Glove short selling have actually started. You can see that on the 18th and 19th, the beginning of, or rather like this week in itself, short selling into Top Glove have become like severely a lot less. Why is that? I mean, of course, perhaps there is no available lender, right? Or maybe the price is not good enough, or maybe you know, they are waiting for something. The short sellers are waiting for something. We don't really know their strategy, but as of today, and remember that the glove prices have been going down for the entire week. Even with the glove prices have been going down for entire week, these short participants are looking into like 100 million ringgit of mark-to-market losses. So at the end of last week, they were facing a 230 million ringgit of mark-to-market losses. Yes, so let me, hold on.
Sure, so I just want to make a couple of points here. Regarding Supermax, yes, I think one of the main reasons is because they haven't been able to find a willing lender who would lend them the shares. The reason for that is because EPF and KWAP, for example, they are not major minority shareholders of Supermax, for example. So I think this is one of the reasons. Another reason is that so Supermax's quarterly report is coming up. Is most likely going to be released next week. They are likely to also issue dividend, significant dividend, and if they do that, the short seller will actually have to either immediately cover the position before the ex-date of the dividend, or the short seller will actually have to pay with cash the corresponding dividend to the lender of the shares. So I think this is one of the main reasons. It's also very similar for Harta. So as you can see, they are most aggressive on Kosan and Top Glove. So for Harta, it is very similar. For Harta, their quarterly report is most likely coming in the first or second week of February. And again, they're going to most likely issue some significant dividend and so on. So I think this is also the reason why they are not so aggressive there as they are. Like, for example, if you can see percentage-wise in terms of what they have shorted for Top Glove and for Kusan, is much, much more aggressive there, I would say. Yeah, this is one of the things.
Yeah, but there is a question here. Do you want to pick it up?
Okay, so we do not like. Okay, so having in mind that this is an over-the-counter transaction, so this is not something that goes according to any official rules by Bursa. Bursa doesn't have specific requirements about how long you can hold a short position in a short position, basically, specifically for RSS activity, right? So, for example, if it's intraday short selling, obviously by the end of the day you have to cover your short position. But if we are talking about regulated short selling, you can actually keep it for a pretty long period of time. However, having in mind what I just mentioned regarding the dividends, it is very likely that the short seller will want to close the position very soon, like literally within the next 1 or 2 weeks, for example. So because it is very possible that they might not be able to hold later on, and it is possible that they'll be in a huge. So right now, what Rondi mentioned is that they are sitting on a huge paper loss, but this loss is just on paper, at least for now. Whereas if they actually need to pay out dividends to the lender of the shares, they will have an actual, physical loss of cash that they'll have to pay out. So, so this is what makes me believe that they're not going to hold it for much longer, actually.
Yeah. So Lawrence, I think just to add on to Nyago's point, because I came from an investment banking background, so just so everybody understand, there are different entities in an investment banking, right? But like, of course, there's the SBL department, there is the asset manager department, there's a trading department, and so on and so forth. But there is also a department which is called the risk department. Okay. In a sense, if let's say I'm in a risk department of one of these short participants and I'm looking into things, and as much as I'm looking into, like, for instance, if a glove is going to rebound, right? You're looking into like such a huge paper losses. I'll be making noise every single day, and again, as Nyago said, as a matter of fact, Nyago, I think Harta Lega is going to announce result at the end of this month, right? So it's like, yeah. So whenever like all these short positions are going to announce a huge dividend kind of like announcement, your funding cost, which I believe is already expensive in the first place, is just going to get more and more expensive. And there are very, very different structural dynamics between shorting a position and being long in a position. Being long in a position, you can hold it for a long time, and maybe you can even easily kind of like average down and whatnot. But being in a short position, number one, as I mentioned just now, your bullets is limited, and it is being shared by a lot of other short participants. So that's number one. And number two is that you are facing kind of like a theta, or rather like a time risk, in a sense that, especially against some supernormal profit sector, and like a sector that has a big windfall in dividends, you're really going against. You're really going against the tide, and especially when your entry price is very low. I mean, it's all fine if, let's say, you did the RSS at a much higher kind of like price, so that is good. But the timing of these short participants shorting the glove stocks are actually not very good in terms of like risk return wise, in my opinion.
So, I'm sorry. Regarding the timing, the problem is for the short seller. There was not really any other opportunity because regulated short selling was banned last year, and it just got unbanned in the beginning of this year. And then they need to do this in between periods. So they ideally need to do it when there is no quarterly report announcement. So these 3 weeks in the beginning of January were basically the only time when they could do something like that. So many people are actually asking why the short seller would do this specifically to the gloves, for example, right? Like why not go to something like Genting, right? Or some of the banks, for example. So what you mentioned is very important, that you need to have a willing lender of the shares, right? So you don't just need to have somebody who is willing to take a short position. You need to have somebody who is willing to actually give them the shares to short them. So in the case of gloves, they were obviously already in November and December in a downtrend because of the vaccine news, and later on because of the negative news about the top glove factories. So the fundamental values of the gloves are much higher than what their pricings were, even in November and December, let alone now. So there have been willing lenders on a huge scale that were willing to actually lend the shares, because they know that later on, anyhow, the price are going to go up after all of this short activity is going to take place. So this is, in my opinion, the main reason why they're attacking specifically the gloves industry, as compared to some industries that I don't believe will be performing very well in the future. I don't think they're going to find any massive lenders of shares there.
Okay, so to answer this question from Chip, if they finish their 4% quota, can they start under 4%? This is basically a rule that is regulated by Bursa. So only if Bursa increase the allowance, then they can short more. But otherwise, no. That means the only way of you shorting to short more is that if some other short participants have covered their shares and reduced the limit. Yeah. And there's another question. So if RSS, they recover RSS, will the share price shoot up? Well, I mean, what happens is that when you short cover, or when you cover your position in terms of your short, you will have to buy a stock. So if let's say you buy it in a massive amount, and if the demand kind of like exceed the supply, then yes, the stock price should actually shoot up. Any other question? Nyago, you want to take this one?
So what are the possible risks for lenders? So obviously the major risk for a lender in this, so okay, we have to understand that this particular short position right now is not a normal short position, right? It's a market moving short position. So a normal short position would be relatively small, usually for hedging purposes, usually intraday. So it would be like, for example, retail short positions, relatively small amounts of shares. Here, as Rondi showed in his graph, we are talking about over 2 billion ringgit worth of shorting of shares right now, right? So we are not talking about a small position. We are talking about something that, when released on the market, unleashed on the market, is going to plummet the stock prices, which happened on Monday, the 4th of January, basically. So, in general, from the point of view of the lender of shares, the problem is that if they lend shares in such massive amounts to somebody to short sell them, in the relatively short term, the price is going to go very steeply down. So if they need to, for example, their portfolio management department decides that they need to sell the shares in this particular period of time for whatever reason, they would be sitting usually on paper losses, because it is possible that they would have bought the shares before that at much higher price. That relates to what I mentioned. So in this particular case, why the lender has been willing to do that is precisely because they do believe that the shares are going to go up no matter what, like probably this month or next month or the month after. But they do, like the lender of the shares does believe that the shares are going to go up in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So from the point of view of the lender, like we know at least one of the lenders is EPF. So we do know that by now. There was an official, so there are required announcements by Bursa. EPF issued an announcement that they have lent out 40 million shares of Top Glove. So in terms of EPF, it's kind of a win-win situation right now. So while for every day that the short seller keeps the short position open, as it is right now, they're actually paying fees to the, I'm not sure how they're called, some lending fees or whatever. They're paying these fees to the EPF. EPF still ultimately controls the share, so they don't have physical official control over the shares right now, but they still own the shares technically. And if any dividends come from the shares, for example, they also belong to EPF. So EPF is in a kind of a win-win-win situation right now by lending the shares out, I would say. So they're in a pretty good state.
Yep. Okay. I think it's already 10 o'clock, so let's move on to the to the company specifics, Nyago.
Yeah, you mentioned.
If I mean, I'm seeing a lot of questions about RSS, which I wish we can answer all of it, but those questions that myself or Nyago have not answered, please go to Stockbit and just lay it all out to us, and we will answer it in Stockbit. Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, regarding I know that we talked that the talk is going to be 1 hour and a half, but I think we are going to go over that time anyhow. If we want to finish everything we want to talk about, of course. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the first company that I want to talk about is of course Top Glove. A few things that are particularly interesting about Top Glove, and I know that you have additional data on that later on when we talk about price targets that have been released by the financial analysts. So the biggest problem, the elephant in the room about Top Glove is the ESG concerns. So a lot of people have been talking about that. In our talk earlier, we talked with you, our private talk, we talked about the fact that, in terms of conditions, the dormitories of Top Glove are, probably incomparably better to the conditions in some other industries, let's say, or some other companies. But of course, Top Glove being the largest manufacturer of gloves in the world is much more in focus of everything that is happening. So my personal opinion on these ESG concerns, which I have shared a number of times, is that ESG concerns matter insofar as they affect the earnings capabilities of the company. So, for example, let's say that the United States, like for example, decides to ban Top Glove as they did in July. This is something that actually affects the earnings of the company. So I would have expected that in July, when the ban actually happened, that's when there was going to be some effect on the market price of Top Glove, and there were going to be released some financial reports, some analyst reports that say that, okay, Top Glove is in a worse position now, so we are downgrading them or something else. This didn't happen. So in November, when the factories got closed for quarantine, I also expected that this was going to happen. So in terms of the price actually fell. In terms of analysts issuing calls on ESG downgrading, they did not happen. They only started happening around the second part of December, for example, which was kind of weird to me, because by that time the ESG concerns were kind of cleared already. So by that time there was no effect of the ESG concerns on earnings, for example. So in terms of what is happening with the United States, I do believe that very soon, as in probably within the next 1 month, the issue is going to be resolved. So I think the Top Glove is going to be unbanned because the situation in the United States in the healthcare system right now is very dire. So they cannot afford to be, I would say, humanitarian right now. So if they have some concerns over some of the matters related to Top Glove, I don't think they can afford to police on that right now, which makes me, so this is actually a positive thing. So all of these things, all of these problems with Top Glove actually happening right now with their workforce. We have heard some whistleblower reports coming from ex-workers of Top Glove and so on. So it's good that they are happening right now, because right now Top Glove is in a position where these kinds of reports are not going to have substantial effect on their earnings capabilities, because we are in time of war, as I mentioned. So nobody can afford to actually pay too much attention on that and actually say, okay, we want to be very high. We want to keep the high ground. We do not want to source PPE from a company that doesn't provide proper conditions to their workforce. So we are going to stop getting the gloves. So nobody can afford that actually right now. So this is a perfect opportunity for Top Glove to actually resolve these problems right now. And I saw that there are some other comments. They are actually talking about automation of the production. So very interesting. During the annual general meeting that happened on the 6th of January, if I'm not mistaken, for Top Glove, they mentioned something very interesting. So last year in 2020, they embarked on a very serious, so they spent quite a lot of money on improving automation within their facilities. And now the amount of people needed for producing 1 million gloves has reduced from 8 to 1.6, which is more than 4 times reduction in the workforce necessary to produce gloves, basically. So you can imagine what kind of added automation we are talking about. Of course, such kind of of course, there's talk going around that of course, Harta's facilities state of the art, and they are the leader in terms of automation and so on. So the problem is that when it comes to automation in manufacturing facilities, of course, companies are very concerned about keeping their in-house know-how and so on. So we can only get partial information, right? So we can only get what the companies tell us that is correct, and of course this is going to get reflected in the production potential in the future, but based on the workforce that works for the company. But what I'm hearing from Top Glove up to now in terms of automation is very optimistic. From it's very good from up to now. So regarding, again, Rondi has a very detailed table with all the analysts' price targets and revenue and profit targets for each of the next 3 financial years for each of the big four glove manufacturers. But I did kind of an exercise into trying to figure out how much might be the projected revenue for Top Glove in particular for this particular financial year. So I based my projections on something that, so usually when the analysts, the bank analysts, for example, when they issue their reports, they base their calculations on the average selling price and how the movement of the average selling price is going to go, and based on the production capacity of so basically the total capacity and the actual utilization of the factories, right? So these are the factors that they use, and based on all of this, they get some general figure. The problem is that, of course, the average selling price moves all the time, for example. So this is kind of a moving target, and you need to input a lot of assumptions there in order to get a final figure. And this final figure is, once again, it's just based on your assumptions, basically. So I wanted to try to do that without any assumptions, just basically on the information that is available out there. And I use the so-called contract liabilities that are in the annual reports of the company. So the contract liabilities actually display the deposits that the company collects from people that expect their orders. So I did I have a post on Stockbit on that, so it's under this slide. I hope that we'll be able to share the slideshow later with the Stockbitters. So I shared on Stockbit actually my whole process of how I calculate everything. I take into account the amount of spot orders and non-spot orders and so on. So in the end, from the 1 billion and 90 million of outstanding contract liabilities as of the last quarterly report, I calculate that the company is going to produce about 24.7 billion in revenue for this year. And when I use net profit margin of 50% as consistent with the first quarter profit margin, I derive a figure of about 12.3 billion in profit after tax. So this is the net profit for the company for 2021 based on my assumptions and based on this calculation. It is not assumptions, it's based on the available information that we have. So this is not assumptions actually. This is based on real information. So if you want to look at it from another point of view, like for example, I'm sure that many of the people have heard that the company announced 20% extra dividend payout. So it's a bonus payout basically. So the payout is going to be 70% for the next 3 quarters at least until the end of 2021. For quarter 1, it was 56%. So the average for 2021 is 66.5%. So the dividend per share for this financial year is going to come at about 1 ringgit according to my calculations. So if you remove, like, let's say that you want to enter Top Glove right now, you want to buy their stock right now, you haven't been holding it for the last couple of months or something, right? So you didn't get the dividend from the first quarter. So the first quarter was 16.5 cent per share. So you are left with 83.5 cent per share. So let's say that you are not a huge believer in the company, or you believe the price is at least slightly overvalued right now. So, and you believe that, okay, if I hold the company, it will not be for a very long term, it will be less, shorter than 1 year, for example. So if you buy it now, and if you hold it until the end of the financial year, which is in August, you will actually get 83.5 cent dividend per share. So from whatever price you buy it, like I think the closing price right now is 6 ringgit and 2 cents or something like this. You just discount 83 cent, and then you will actually get the net value that you are paying for the company if you are holding it for this period. I think this is a fair way to actually look at things. For example, for the people that are not particularly bullish on the glove sector as a whole. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss in particular about Top Glove in more detail is about their Hong Kong listing. So we don't have a lot of information on that. So the company says that they are going to get listed on the Hong Kong stock market by the middle of this year. From the point of view of finances, it doesn't make so much sense, and I don't think it's going to be material from this point of view. So I don't think any type of new shares, for example, that they issue on the stock market or something like this, I don't think the amount is going to be material to actually cause any significant dilution of the share value of the current shareholders. I think the main reason for them doing that is in order to get the market price closer to what the fundamentals of the company suggest. So Bursa, there are huge discrepancies between how glove companies are being valued on Bursa and on other stock markets. I prepared a couple of slides on that. We can see later. We can see them later. But these discrepancies can basically only be resolved if the companies get exposed to other markets. For example, of course, Top Glove is also listed. It's basically, I don't know what exactly is the term, but they are listed on the SGX in Singapore, and then the price in Singapore actually follows the price on Bursa. So it's pretty much the same. Like it doesn't make any difference. So the Hong Kong listing is going to be different. The price there is going to be free floating. So basically, it's not going to be attached to the price on Bursa, from what I gather. And basically, if you later on, we'll see how it works with Inco, you can say the biggest competitor of the Malaysian companies in China. You'll see that the price basically skyrocketing over the last few weeks there. So something very similar is expected to happen. And so the most insane thing is that Inco right now, in terms of market valuation, is the biggest glove company in the world. So Inco, China, which is listed on the Shenzhen stock exchange, is bigger in market value, market capitalization than Top Glove. So and their production capacity is more than, I believe, about 3 times smaller than that of Top Glove. So you can imagine what huge difference in valuations we are talking about between the different markets. So I think the Hong Kong listing is more about more about adjustment to fundamentals rather than an exposure, obviously, to a much larger investor pool than anything else.
Yeah, I think I just want to add in terms of the Hong Kong listing, right? There are two ways of how Top Glove is going to list in Hong Kong. Number one is they can actually sell away their current treasury stock. And of course, secondly, is they can issue new shares. In my personal opinion, I think they are going to do a mix of both, perhaps. And that is actually one of the reasons why I was not very surprised at the amount of share buyback that they used to do last time. Because I mean, at the end of the day, what they could have done is that they buy back their shares and put it into the treasury stock and use this for Hong Kong listing going forward. Yeah, just thought of adding that as well. Okay, so
Yes.
Before we move on to the Supermax, I think perhaps I'll just share this screen of mine. So I would like to, I mean, thanks, Nyago, for your opinion in terms of how you value Top Glove. But now I guess I also want to kind of like chip in terms of Top Glove and trying to see or trying to measure what is the intrinsic fair value of Top Glove. Now, I personally don't really like to talk about PE ratio and valuation and fair value too much, because I believe that a quality of business should be more than just this kind of like metrics. But anyway, so what I have done over here, as you all can see, this is Top Glove is very well covered. These are all the analyst target prices, and you can see that the average target price for this particular for Top Glove is at 8 ringgit 57 cents. Okay, and of course the lowest amongst all of them is JP Morgan. Yes, JP Morgan. Nyagos. All right.
I have nothing in particular against JP Morgan.
And so what I'm going to do next is that, okay, so now over here, what we can see is this is a PE deviation band, okay? And these are like historical kind of like valuation. There is 3 years historical PE average is at 39 for Top Glove, 5 years is at 31, 10 years is at 25, and all-time historical PE average from the time that they were listed is at 20 times, okay? So what I've done then is that, because a lot of people are overtly concerned about average selling price. And so I thought it would have been quite an interesting kind of like exercise to see how much to value Top Glove in a long-term setting, right? So what I've done then is that out of all the analysts that I have access to their research reports, I have kind of like jot down all their revenue, financial projections for the next 3 years, 21, 22, 23. Okay, and what I've done then is that I have kind of like multiplied them to get the intrinsic fair value, basing it on 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and all-time historical PE average for the particular stock. All right, so as you can see, in 2021, all the analysts are pretty bullish. Even JP Morgan is actually very bullish for 2021. But for 2022, a lot of the pictures have started to change. A lot of people suddenly becomes more bearish. Some people a lot more bullish, right? So these are, I guess, but all of them are very subjective. If you see the variance between the highest and the lowest, and you look into like the median of all, it will tell you the entire story that actually a lot of people are really, really uncertain how the average selling price and what's the longevity of the average selling price and whatnot. But yeah, it's quite kind of like constant in the sense that everyone believes that by the 2023, the net profit will definitely be a lot lower than 2022, which is a lot lower than 2021. So now, if let's say we are just talking this, theoretically speaking, we would like to try and predict how much to value Top Glove in 2023, right? So what I've done is that from all the analysts and all their kind of like projected net profit in 2023, what is the average? And the consensus average from the data I have is that by 2023, Top Glove is going to record 2.5 billion ringgit of net profit. And by 2.5 billion ringgit of net profit, if I'm going to imply this to their historical PE average, 3 years PE average, then these are kind of like their fair value, right? Yeah, so even at the most bearish kind of scenario, in a sense that at 2023 profit to be multiplied at their all-time historical PE average, which is the lowest amongst all of them, it is still trading at 6.3 times. 6.3 times. Sorry, it is the intrinsic value at 6.3 ringgit. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. So I mean, this is a very, very good demonstration of what exactly we are talking about here. So again, just to reiterate on that, so these calculations of RONDI are based on 2023 projections, right? So they are not based on 2021 massive super profits. They are not based on 2022 super good profits. They're based on 2023. So yeah, I mean, this is great. It's nice. And I know you have this calculation for all the companies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Sorry. Just and this one is just specifically on Top Glove. Just now, Nyago was talking about his dividend, right? So again, so Top Glove have mentioned additional 20% of dividend, and they are the only one that has actually said that. So 70% dividend out of 2021 total net profit from all the analysts combined, or the consensus, is basically 7.1 billion, and this is what's going to be going to the investors' pocket, and already paid is 16.5 in terms of dividend per share, and then the balance is 72 cents, and this is a lot lower than Nyago's personal calculation, right? But even at 72 cents, and if let's say 72 cents divided by today's price of 6.02, you're practically looking at an additional 12% of dividend yield, not until the end of the year. This is 12% dividend yield until August 2021.
Sure. By the way, I just want to make a point here, just a quick point. If you can return back to your slide, I just want to show something. So you can see that a lot of the projections for 2021 show for net profit less than 10 billion. Just to mention that the net profit for the first quarter of the year was about 2.38 billion. So let's say for ease of calculation, right? Let's say it's 2.5 billion. So this is arguably the weakest quarter for the company, both because the ASPs were not at their maximum and because the factories were closed. So the weakest quarter, they have 2.5 almost billion of net profit. So I would say it's impossible, basically, for their net profit to be less than 10 billion for the entire year. So for example, you can see HSBC gives 7.7 billion. I have no idea how they can justify that, because 7.77 billion means that the first quarter accounts for almost 30% of the net profit for the entire year, which I mean, I think it's pretty much impossible. Nomura gives 8.3 billion. You know, we have seen the M Bank, M Invest. I'm not seeing it here actually. So M Invest also gives 7.8 billion or something like this. So yeah, I mean, some of these valuations, some of these calculations don't make a lot of sense to me, specifically for 2021, for which we have a lot of visibility, I would say. Of course, for 2022, 2023, we can speculate a lot. You can see, for example, JP Morgan gives 668 million net profit for 2023, which is 6% profit margin. Just to tell everybody, Top Glove haven't reported 6% profit margin since 2011. So I have no idea how this is justifiable. And if you are asking why, for example, they are not, they can make adjustments, for example, on the revenues, right? But why they cannot make adjustments on the revenues is because basically the company's capacity for production capacity is going to go up to 110 billion pieces by the end of this year. So basically, their annual capacity means that their annual revenue is going to come at about 12 billion ringgit, no matter, and this is based on pre-COVID calculations of the ASP. So this is based on around between 25 and $30 per 1,000 pieces. So their revenue is basically around 12 billion year in, year out after they complete the expansion this year.
Nyago, do you wanna try and answer this question? I think it's a pretty good question.
Yeah. So basically, this is what I'm talking about as well. So let's not talk about PEs as you mentioned. PE is a very it has a lot of additional things that need to come with it in order to justify any particular PE. So, for example, as we have discussed with you, some of the analysts are going with the same PE valuations across the board. So they are assigning the same PE on Top Glove, on Harta, on Kosan, and then they are like saying, okay, all the companies are the same. Basically, they all produce gloves, so why not assign the same PE, forward PEs or whatever. So PEs don't work well. So what you need to figure out is the actual financials of the company. So you want to figure out how much is the actual revenue of the company. So how much money is actually going to go inside the company, and then from there you can make some estimates on the profit margins. So, for example, as I mentioned, the company after the expansion this year is going to be producing gloves that at normal times, we are not talking about COVID valuations, we are talking about normal times. At normal times, is going to be producing about 12 billion ringgit in revenue per year. So from this 12 billion ringgit revenue per year, you can pretty much only go you cannot go too low in terms of the net profits. So even as you can see, JP Morgan that is giving 6% profit margin, you can see that this is far below anybody else's estimate. So the average is 19%. The next worst after JP Morgan in terms of profit margin for 2023 was at Macquarie. So Macquarie, coincidentally, they have a call warrant that expires next week on Top Glove. So I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but they are the next most bearish in terms of 2023 estimates of the net profit of the company. So this is something that you need to bear in mind. You don't focus so much on the historical P's or P valuations or whatever. This is not so important. My opinion. This is my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, shall we go to the next company?
Sure. Yeah. So the next company that I want to showcase is actually Supermax. So the interesting thing about Supermax as compared to everybody else was that they managed to hike up their. Sorry, I'm just going to do that. So they managed to hike up their average selling prices extremely fast, like almost instantly after the crisis kicked in. They actually hike up their average selling price to the max, and this is very clearly visible from their insane profit margin. So I have added here the profit before tax margin. So this is not a EBITDA margin. So you already discount many things there, and the only things that you are not discounting is actually the tax. So before tax, the company had 77.6% profit margin for the last quarter, which is, insane. I have very, very rarely seen this ever in any company. So why they are able to do that? One of the reasons is because they already had available stocks in the countries that were most in need of gloves in the beginning of the crisis and most ready to pay top dollar or top pound for to get these gloves as soon as possible. So, for example, they had stockpiles in their facilities in the UK and in the US, and then in the very beginning of the COVID crisis, they already sold these stockpiles to the UK government, to the US government, for example. So that's where a huge, this huge immediate spike in their ASPs came from. Another thing which is very, very important for Supermax is that they produce exclusively neutral gloves. I mean, everybody knows about their OBM model and that they market their own brands and so on, so I'm not going to talk about that. But they produce neutral gloves, which are currently the highest profit margin segment. And of course, they have their own brands, which means that they can, they can further sustain their huge profit margins. So the profit margin after tax, so the net profit margin for the last quarter was 60% actually. And as you can see, out of it, about more than 17% comes from taxes only. So Supermax is in an extremely good relationship with a number of governments in the world where they have presence, including the US, Canada, and UK. And these are the governments that have been willing to pay the highest amounts of money for things related to COVID in particular. And most likely they're going to be the ones that are willing to, to again, pay top dollar moving forward as well. So one of the things that is telling about that, and one of the things that is telling about what might be the dynamics between Supermax and the governments in these countries is that the company is actually embarking on expansions in the United States and in the United Kingdom. So from an economic and financial point of view, setting up a factory in the United States as opposed to setting up one in Malaysia makes relatively little sense because, I mean, we talked about the strategic advantages of Malaysia earlier. So it would be much, theoretically, with other things equal, it would be much more profitable for the company to actually set up a company in Malaysia if we, if we exclude any information that we don't know. But obviously, there is some information that we do not know that is very material there. So my suspicion is, so the United States announced that they have a contract for $500 million for setting up medical glove production facilities on US soil. And coincidentally, the endeavor of Supermax cost $550 million, the expansion in the United States in particular. So I have some suspicions that they have some very, very strong contract with the US government for this expansion in the United States. And this contract is going to be very solid and very long term. So it's going to be extremely profitable for the company. I mean, this is my only, the thing that I extrapolate from these expansions that they're participating in right now. And of course, they are strengthening their relationship with all of these countries. They just recently donated gloves to Canada and so on. So they're in very, very good position. So if you are worried, like if your worry regarding Top Glove is related to their ESG risk. So if you think that, the bad press about Top Glove is worrying you, if you are, humanitarian and you hate people being exploited and so on, and that's why you don't like Top Glove. So Supermax is, it has pristine reputation and is in very, very good relationships with the countries that are most concerned about these kind of ESG risks. So, this would be my suggestion in this case. So this is basically what I do myself. So my main position in gloves is in Top Glove, and I have a much smaller position right now in Supermax. And the reason why I'm keeping this position in Supermax is specifically to hedge against that risk that indeed exists in Top Glove, at least in the short term, that there are some ESG concerns ongoing there. Okay, so regarding the price targets, Rondi already showed that. So the last thing that I actually want to show before concluding is related to the price movement. So earlier with Rondi, we talked about this that I call the big short. Of course, I'm not the inventor of the phrase, but this big short on gloves has significantly distorted the natural movement of the stock prices on the market. And you can very easily see it by looking at companies that are listed on other markets. So for example, Riverstone, that is listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. And sorry, let me put this as a slideshow. So basically this company has traditionally, especially over the last 1 year, it has been following relatively well the movement of the stock prices on Bursa. And you can see that in January, the price of this company started increasing pretty rapidly. So right now it's at the level that is, the highest since early November, basically. Of course, if you compare this to the figures for the Malaysian glove companies, it's completely different. So there's no such increase in price in the Malaysian companies, for example. So it's even more clear when you look at companies that are not so related. So the deviation from the movements on Bursa is more significant. So the first one is Sri Trank on the Thailand Stock Exchange. So you can see that the price just skyrocketed in January. Of course, there are more reasons there for Sri Trank, because of course the company is not just a gloves producer, so it produces natural rubber, so it's a rubber producer, and this is actually its main business before it started going into the glove production business. But of course, the main things are actually, the main increase in price is of course related to its glove business, and that's what has been happening since the beginning of January. So why this is happening? Most likely, at least my theory is that people after after some dips in September, October, November, there were a few times when there were dips for different companies, basically. People actually came to, so these dips were mostly related to vaccine news, and people actually came to realize that, okay, we have vaccines, but we have a lot more problems to deal with now that we have vaccines. So it's not going to be a miracle solution that is going to end the crisis just tomorrow or even this year or anything like this. And I think people started realizing that around the end of December or beginning of January, when the news about the new variants of the virus, for example, started popping up. And of course, the most interesting one is the movement of Medical. So you can see that after a kind of a plateau of the prices, so they kind of plateaued in August, and in September they dropped a little bit when the glove news started coming in. Later on, they were slowly increasing, and then you can see that in January they actually shot up. So and as I mentioned earlier, now Inco is the biggest glove producer in the world in terms of market cap. So we were talking earlier with Rondi, and then he mentioned something very interesting, that he feels a bit, it's kind of weird because an Indonesian and a Bulgarian are talking about the glove manufacturing industry, which is supposed to be the pride of Malaysia. I mean, because Malaysia is the world leader in this industry by a huge margin against everybody else. Yeah, the biggest company in the world in terms of market capitalization right now is China's Inco Medical.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That was all I wanted to talk about today. I mean, of course, there were a lot more things that I want to talk about, but we are already way over the time that we discussed, and I think people are getting bored. So yeah, we can continue the discussion, I guess, on Stockbit, and as Rondi mentioned, I will also try my best to any questions that anybody might have for me.
Yeah, so I think before we end the session, just perhaps the last kind of like 5-10 minutes. Okay, before that, I think there is this admin did mention RSS is not the only cause. Supermax hardly had any RSS yet. Prices were pummeled down, so they were genuine selling. So I think what Yago had kind of like showed earlier between the share price weakness from Riverstone and from the Malaysian glove against like Riverstone and UG Healthcare, which is listed in SGX, against Sri Trank, which is listed in Thailand, and against Inco, which is listed in Shanghai. It also kind of like show that although yes, perhaps you're right, but RSS definitely plays a part in the share price weakness of the Malaysian players. I think that's something that I would like to share. And just before we go, I guess I just want to also do the similar exercise, but for the rest of the stock. So I did exactly what I did just now on Top Glove, but on Supermax first. So this is basically all the analysts that is covering Supermax. As you can see, because there is no Macquarie here and there's no JP Morgan, it is all buy. And and the average target price is very high. It's at 11 ringgit. Now looking into like again doing similar exercise of historical PE ratio of Supermax, you can see that it is lower than Top Glove, right? And it's definitely lower than Kosan and even Harta Lega. So coming back to Nyago's point earlier, where there is an analyst recently that just give a blanket 18 times PE to all the stock counters. That kind of like perhaps shows that he might not understand the characteristics of the Malaysian rubber counters, right? Because different counters amongst the top four, they always have different historical PE ratio anyway. So so the similar exercise to be done in Supermax, as you can see, is that out of all the analysts and all their net profit estimates, if let's say we are trying to forecast something that is very, very ahead in terms of timeline, which is in 2023, the analyst forecast on that particular 2023, the consensus is at 1.6 billion ringgit for Supermax net profit. And if we kind of like imply this to the lowest of the historical PE average, which is at 12 times PE, that in itself still comes up at 7.48, which is again 22% higher than where we are at the moment. I feel like this is a very, very conservative kind of like approach in order trying to find out what is the bear case fair value for the rubber glove, because number one, we are actually talking about something that is 3 years in advance, right? And number two, we are actually talking about taking not only the historical average, but the lowest historical average ever for each of the companies. So that in itself is already very, very prudent. So I believe, I believe this is kind of like a very conservative and prudent estimate of a bear case scenario. Now, going into Kosan, if we do the same thing, what happened is that, okay, for Kosan, because their year end is at December 2020, so the analysts have only given us until 2022. And if we kind of like do that, of course, it is slightly different than what you have to those estimates in 2023. And lastly, my personal favorite is Harta Lega. So what you can see, so these are all the analysts that is covering Harta Lega. Again, the only underweight is JP Morgan. And if you see that historical average for JP Morgan, for Harta Lega, right, even at the all-time historical average, it is trading at 27.7 times PE ratio, right? And as a matter of fact, even pre-COVID, Harta Lega was never traded below 20 times PE ratio. So that shows how much the market values Harta Lega. There are some certain counters in Malaysia, like your QL and whatnot, in which they will always fetch a very high valuation. And Harta Lega is, I think, one of those counters as well, either from, how they became the pioneer of nitrile glove and how their ESG rating is and whatnot. So this is definitely a good counter in terms of integrity and whatnot. And if we do the same exercise in Harta Lega, you are looking into like, a 16.34 in terms of intrinsic fair value and a 40% upside. Now, one thing which is interesting in Harta Lega, right, if you guys see, and why I actually like this, and also I like reverse tone, is I believe that the way and the manner Harta Lega has done, the way they conduct their business in this particular pandemic, it definitely have helped them in a sense of giving them a longevity for their net profit. So if you guys can see, even the analysts are looking at, from 2021 to 2022 to 2023, right? There isn't a huge reduction in net profit. Even JP Morgan is still giving them a double figure in terms of net profit margin in 2023, right? So you can see that they are pretty resilient and their earnings is a lot more durable Why people are, a lot of people have been asking why this happened. I think that has got a lot to do with the way Harta Lega conduct the business, because sometimes in life and sometimes in business, right? It's like, yeah, for one thing is, you can be opportunistic and you can make as much money as possible, but on the other end of the spectrum is, how do you conduct yourself in times of need, and how do you kind of like, how do you take care of customer relationship, right? Because Harta Rega for one, and I know Riverstone as well, what they have done is that although they can definitely hike up the average selling price, but they kind of like prioritize customer relationship. And we know from the example that we have seen across the social media, how their clients are very grateful about that. So I think that kind of like, that has a lasting impact, I suppose. And yeah, kind of like add to the durability of their net profit going forward. So yeah, I guess that's about all.
So just one point I wanted to make on the Supermax question. So the Supermax price in general has not been exhibiting any sort of logic. I think most people are unable to evaluate the company very well, which I can understand, because in terms of information availability, the information amount is likely the smallest out of all the big four for Supermax. So in the last few weeks, at least, the price of Supermax has mostly just been following the general trend. So it's not following its own dynamic. It's mostly following what's going on with the other companies, in particular with Top Glove. I think if we have, if we project a graph where we have the movements of the Top Glove price and then the movements of the Supermax price, we'll see that they are almost identical, at least over the last few weeks, or I think even over the last few months, actually. So I think what happens is that most people that are looking at Top Glove might also be looking at Supermax, for example. So if people become concerned about Top Glove, they also sell their shares on Supermax, for example. But again, it's exactly the opposite. So Supermax is in a completely different situation from Top Glove. So there's no logic in this happening. But having in mind that most of the investors in Supermax are actually retailers, I can understand why this is actually happening. So yeah, whoever asked this question, I didn't see who asked it, is correct in that there is not so much short selling on Supermax, and the reason for the drop in the price of Supermax is actually because the prices for the rest of the glove counters fell, not because of the short selling on Supermax itself.
Yeah, I think that's something that kind of like annoyed me as well, in a sense that, what happened in Top Glove should not kind of like bring down the entire glove sector, right? But I guess in Malaysia, the entire sentiment just follows suit, So, oops, where's Nyago? Okay, Nyago suddenly disappeared. But yeah, so anyway, let me see if Nyago is coming back on. Okay, anyways, guys, I think that's perhaps the end of our presentation for today. We will be sharing the slides. We'll be sharing the slides in Stockbit. Yeah. Nyago, you'll be sharing your slides in Stockbit as well?
Sure, yeah. If you think that's a good idea, sure, I'll share them.
Yeah, I will personally share my slides as well. And I think we can always continue our discussion in Stockbit. Again, thank you guys. I think there are like about 500 of you guys watching us for the entire, I don't know, like 2.5 hours. Sorry if it takes the entire evening. Yeah, I think that's all we have for now. Nyago, any last words?
Thank you very much for providing the platform in the first place. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands what's happening. So I am not getting paid for doing this presentation. So this is entirely free presentation. The only reason why I believe that this information hopefully will be valuable to some people is because I believe that there is a lot of misunderstanding among the retail investors in Malaysia. So I really truly hope that it will be of some use to some people at least. And it's great that you are sharing all of this and the whole platform for free, basically.
Yeah. So I think before I go, I guess I just want to kind of like highlight to everyone that it doesn't matter whether you're glove on or you're glove off, whether you're bullish or whether you're bearish on glove. As a matter of fact, I think what's important is that if let's say you are investing or you're looking to invest in glove, your best friend is conviction, right? So I think conviction is number one friend because as everybody knows, rubber glove is a very, very volatile kind of like play. So if you are somebody that cannot kind of like take the gyrations, the market gyrations, perhaps this is not something that is for you. But if let's say you believe in what you know and you're very objective and you're a true fundamentalist, I think that there should always be a space for rubber glove in your portfolio, especially this year. It adds kind of like it adds value, it adds yield into the entire portfolio. It adds balance, in my opinion. Okay, I think that's all from me today.
Thank you, Ronnie. Have a good one.
All right, thank you, thanks everyone. Good night.
Bye bye.